The three phases of every crash that I write about actually comes from the Great Crash of 1929, which has a special place in the history books. Oh, by the way, when economists say great, they mean the opposite. So the Great Crash of 1929 led to the Great Depression of the 1930s. So what you saw was exuberance. Think about the roaring 20s. Commercial aircrafts, getting automobiles, consumer goods. People piled into the stock market going, wow, this is roaring, it's called the roaring 20s for a reason. However, they did it with debt. So when it crashed, the banks were brought down.
10 times leverage, wasn't it?
So huge, absolutely huge. And then you just had widespread bankruptcy. So the second phase of every crash is how you resolve it. Third phase is the aftermath. So FDR was instrumental in the resolution of the crisis, but the aftermath was so bad, and that was because of policy mistakes. So going to how FDR did it. So FDR, imagine you win the US election. You are now president of the United States. So your first day in office, your team goes, oh, by the way, you've got a month-long bank run. People are just pulling their money out of the banks. It is, you've got to. So literally over a weekend, he closed all the banks and then he shut the stock exchange. And he did his famous fireside chat. You guys appreciate this because you're podcast hosts, where he did a radio broadcast and he spoke to Americans directly. And he said, we have sorted the banks. Only the sound ones will reopen. So believe me when I say that it's safer to put your money in the bank than under your mattress. So then come Monday, there were queues outside the banks. But to their great relief, it was to deposit money.
Yeah, not to withdraw anymore.
Yeah. And so he was credible. And so that's the trade.
I think he said that was the biggest day in the stock market in American history after that.
Exactly. When the stock market opened, again, it was the biggest one-day jump to date at that point. So why was he so credible? So he acted quickly. He did something his predecessor couldn't do in 3 years. Because this is now, by this point, it's 1933. It's been miserable since 1929. However, he was backed up by deposit insurance and legislation that was already in the works. So it's credibility backed up by policies that gave the confidence that the system was being, rebuilt. But why was the aftermath so bad? So when I write about the third phase, the aftermath of any crisis depends on the cause of the crisis. So that's the first phase, how much debt. Second phase, which is how credible is the policy making. So the Great Depression lasted for a decade, and it was absolutely horrible for millions and millions of people because it was a bank crash. And secondly, there were policy mistakes. So there was actually a second recession in 1937. It's called the recession within a depression. And it's because the Fed, the Treasury, they thought the economy was recovering, and then they withdrew their support prematurely. And then that triggered another downturn. And it wasn't until 1941 with the advent of World War II, that the Great Depression actually ended. And so in all the crashes I write about, the aftermath, the third phase, depends hugely on what the cause is and then the policy measures used to address the crisis. But the reason why the Great Depression holds this specific place is because it's still the model for the lessons you should draw from this kind of crisis, in order not to inflict misery upon millions of people, which obviously is something that all great crashes unfortunately share. By the way, you might be wondering why the second downturn was called a recession and the first one was a depression. So there's no technical definition of the difference for economists. A depression is just something which is significantly worse than a recession. Or in the Ronald Reagan formulation that I write about in the book, a recession is when your neighbor loses his job. A depression is when you lose your job.
So, I just said it was a catchy name, recession inside of depression. Or yeah, it's just a catchy phrase, but that makes sense. So depressions are worse than recessions.
Yeah, significantly worse. But so trying to calculate it is pretty challenging. It's just miserable all around, unfortunately.
And then they had a war.
Yeah, which kind of dragged them out of it.
Yeah.
Like that was the catalyst to the rejuvenation of the economy. Was a horrific war. That was a clip from a recent conversation we had with Linda Yu about financial crashes. If you want to see the full episode, then just click here.